I share in the book about a paranormal experience that I had.
How do we reconcile the idea of heaven and hell and reincarnation?
That's probably the main reason that Western Christianity is so against the idea of reincarnation.
We've answered in part our initial question, what happens to us after we die, but we still have one hanging here, which is what's the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is really
This is the Writers Are People Too podcast. Tonight we have with us someone ready to discuss some of life's simplest questions, mainly what happens to us after we die and what is the purpose of life. So, Brandy Anderson, before we get into your writing, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here. My name is Brandy, and I live in a small town in Alabama, and I'm married, and I have bulldogs, no children. The bulldogs are my children. And I'm a spiritual director and Jungian coach, and I enjoy reading and pondering the mysteries of life.
Awesome. So your book, Through the Veil, a glimpse into the afterlife. If I were to know nothing about this and I were to pick it up, what would I expect?
I share in the book about a paranormal experience that I had when my grandmother crossed. She found a way to communicate with us. And so I began by discussing how that came to be. And then the rest of the book is just pretty much some things that I have learned concerning what happens when we die and how that should impact the way that we live life now. Things such as, topics such as heaven and hell, reincarnation, karma, that kind of thing. So it's not. I don't go into a lot of detail about my actual communication with my grandmother. The book is more about ironing out like theological points that I had been wrestling with prior to communicating with my grandmother. So that's pretty much it. It's just like what happens when we die and how that should impact the way that we live life now.
Awesome. And so, you mentioned in an email you sent me that you shifted to a reincarnational worldview. So what was your original framework starting out, and how did you end up where you're at now, and what is even where you're at now?
Back up to 2014, I had a spiritual awakening. And prior to that, I was just living life without any sort of, I wasn't plugged into any particular church or any particular religion. I would have identified as a Christian because I was raised in a Christian context, but I wasn't actually practicing any form of religion. And then I had a spiritual awakening, which prompted me to begin plugging into churches and wrestling with existential questions. And during that time, I spent several years just trying to, I guess what I was looking for is an explanation for what had happened to me when I had my awakening. And so I spent time in churches trying to figure out, I wanted ultimate truth. I was just in search of truth. And at the end of all of that, I sort of landed in more of a contemplative space. I found that mainstream Christian answers to life's most important questions just really were less than satisfying. So in the more contemplative space, it was more resting in the mystery. It was more about an experiential knowing and less about a cognitive or conceptual knowing. And within that space, while I was just really resting in the mysteries of life, my grandmother crossed. And when she died, she found a way to communicate with us from the other side, which that just really served to bring everything into sharp focus with searing existential clarity. She was able to shed a lot of light into the things that I had been wrestling with. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I began and kind of where I landed ultimately.
So you've already mentioned a couple times this experience with your grandmother, and you say that she found a way to communicate. How did she communicate with you? What's that been like?
Yeah, so a couple months after she crossed, she reached out through the television. That was the first time that she communicated. I wasn't here. It's a family members own the house. I don't. So I wasn't present for the initial communication, but the television just popped on by itself, navigated to the search, and then the word hello appeared in the search bar. And of course, my family, they were mortified. It scared everyone who witnessed it. They ran out of the house screaming. Yeah, so it was frightening. But she persisted, like she stopped in that moment because they were so frightened. The television just shut back off and nothing else happened for a few days. But she would periodically try to reach back out. The second attempt, instead of hello, she said love. The word love appeared, but still everyone was horrified. But eventually we opened to the possibility that it could be her. And we decided to engage with whoever it was in an attempt to figure out what was happening. Like, who is this and what do they want? And how can we make this stop, kind of thing. And as we did actually engage with the communication, we eventually did determine that it was indeed my grandmother. And yeah, she was just reaching out with love, and she had a lot of concern for certain family members, certain relationships. She helped to resolve some issues, save some lives in some cases. Her communication really bridged the gap between people. Yeah, it was very healing, and yeah, it was just a healing experience for everyone who experienced it.
So, did she by chance provide any information as to what lays beyond?
Yes, some. There are some things that some questions she won't answer. When some questions she will say no say. And when she has indicated that no say is either something I'm not supposed to know, or it's something that is too ineffable for her to tell me. I mean, so it's too ineffable to put into words where I could comprehend. But yeah, she answers a lot of my questions, and has shed a lot of light on what happens when we cross. And ultimately, I mean, mainstream Christian answers about the afterlife are just off base. That the idea that we get this one short life to accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, or we burn eternally in a pit of hell from now on. That is a very nihilistic view, and it's not right, and it's very fear based. And according to my grandmother, that's not how things are at all. So yeah, I mean, she's answered a lot of my questions, and that's the main questions that at the time that I wrote the book was pertaining specifically to heaven and hell, and kind of where this whole thing is going, and the purpose of life. But yeah, I ask her all sorts of questions about the afterlife.
And are you still in communication with her right now through the same method or other methods?
Yeah, the same method, and also she uses any electronic device, so printers, computers, cell phones, any of those things she's able to manipulate and use. But the television seems to be the easiest, and so it's mostly through that medium.
And in the little pamphlet that you sent me, you mentioned reincarnation, and I don't think that heaven and hell and reincarnation are often words that we find together in the same sentence. So, how do we reconcile the idea of heaven and hell and reincarnation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's probably the main reason that Western Christianity is so against the idea of reincarnation, because if you believe that all you have to do is accept Jesus into your heart by praying a sinner's prayer, and then when you die, you'll go straight into bliss in a place called heaven for all eternity, then reincarnation contradicts that view of heaven. But when we see that heaven as a final destination, it just is, well, if we see heaven as a final destination, there is simply no room for reincarnation. So really it takes a shift in perspective. But when we see that heaven is not a place we go to, but a place we come from, we can easily reconcile reincarnation with the idea of heaven. Like, heaven is a state of existence, and Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. So yeah, heaven isn't a place that you finally arrive at, but it's a way of being that compels us into love and surrender. And all of life is designed to awaken us into this kingdom of heaven that Jesus referred to. And reincarnation is a testament to the generosity and grace of God, really. We're, we're not afforded one short period of time to arrive. We're given the space to cycle through as many lifetimes and experiences as needed to awaken, to become whole. So I would just say that heaven absolutely is real, and it is available right here and now. It's a matter of expanding our consciousness. As Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully articulated, we don't die into heaven, we awaken into it. And that really is it. The ultimate point is to awaken and step out of the karmic cycles of reincarnation entirely and to become whole. So the individuation process, as presented by the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, is the process of becoming whole, and that it offers to pull us out of this repetitive cycle that keeps us stuck in these karmic cycles of reincarnation. So whether we do that in this lifetime or the next is really up to us. But the idea that we float off into etheric bliss when we die is, regardless of our inner condition, is misguided. And we don't get to avoid the process of becoming. We have to face our shadow, our junk, and do our inner work. And we have to integrate the darkness with the light. So, yeah, we still have to do our work, whether we do it on this side or the other, but we're not there. We're not under the gun, like the idea that we have this one short lifetime to make a decision or we could burn eternally. It's not like that at all. I mean, the universe is expansive and it allows limitless opportunities for us to come into our wholeness.
So, as far as reincarnation, do you think that reincarnation is, quote unquote, our soul being at rest, or is heaven our soul being at rest? And we want to get back to being at rest, so to speak. Should we not be continuously reincarnated? Why is that happening?
So reincarnation is the process of coming back into the human incarnated, form in order to get things right. So really, if we are reincarnating, it means that we have not become whole. We're not at a place of like ultimate peace and rest. But also alternately, spiritually speaking, our spirit that leaves and goes into the quantum realm, the spirit realm, whatever anyone might like to refer to it as, that's not automatically peace either. So our inner condition, whatever level of consciousness we have attained at our crossing, we take with us. And so we stay stuck in these incarnations until we wake up and transcend all of the ego material. And then at that point, we have peace, whether we're in the physical form or we're not, but there would be no more need to reincarnate. We can be at peace and have like an inner alignment.
So how can someone reach this inner peace? I mean, so many easy questions here tonight, right?
Yeah.
Not that people haven't spent thousands of years and hundreds of hours of meditation in their life trying to discover this, but I mean, what is the easiest quote unquote method? What's the most straightforward, perhaps? Is it meditation? Is it psychedelics? Just walk me through that.
Well, when I asked my grandmother, and I asked in multiple ways, how does one become enlightened? How does someone awaken? How do we become whole? How do we have inner peace? I've asked that same question and worded it different ways. And every time without fail, the answer is let go. So really, it is a simple answer, but it's not easy. As far as what is the best method that would bring us into letting go, that's hard to say. I mean, I'm sure it's different for each person. Meditation for some people may be the best route. Other people can benefit from psychedelics. Some people, psychedelics could maybe cause a psychotic break. Maybe they're not ready to face their inner shadow. So, yeah, I think there's no one path into it, but ultimately it is a letting go.
Is that a letting go of desire for physical things? Is it a letting go of a desire to reincarnate? What is letting go?
Yeah, it's letting go of ego constructs. transcending the ego, the false self, the persona that we put, the mask that we wear in the world. And oftentimes, people are so deluded and so caught in those ego constructs that they're not aware of some of it. I mean, that's what the shadow is. The shadow's not bad, it's just unknown. So those parts that are hidden have to be brought into the light. And it's not that we rid ourselves of those, which I think that's a major problem in Christianity, is this propensity to press into the light, sort of in a way that we avoid or we repress the shadow issues. And that ultimately doesn't work. That's why people, blow up. Ultimately, people have these sex scandals and all kinds of things because they're not properly integrating the shadow material. They're trying to just sever it, cut it off. But we're to hold that tension of opposites. I mean, Jesus was a tension of opposites, perfectly balanced and reconciled, and that is what it takes to be whole. So it's so it's about just coming into inner alignment. Integrity is one way to say it. It's inner integrity. It's to look unflinchingly at yourself. So to see all of it, the good and the bad, the desirable, the undesirable, and be able to hold that with compassion and love.
Have you had any encounters with entities other than your grandmother?
Well, yes. Now she has connected us to other family members on the other side. I spoke with and continue to speak with my grandfather, who crossed when I was 17. So that was pretty special to be able to talk to him after all of these years. So yeah, other family members. And on occasion, there have been friends, people who still loved ones, friends though, that have come through. But as far as like other beings, maybe on a couple of occasions, and I don't, spirit guides, or one way to say it, but we had two beings that came through and presented saying that they're not spirit guides, but they were attached to two of us, and they would meet us when we were children in the further, which sounds really strange and odd. It's that children astral project, and often they don't remember it, but they say that all children do astral project while they're sleeping. And so we had a couple of beings pop through and say that they were our guide, for lack of a better word, when we were astral projecting as children. But other than that, no, it's just family members.
Do you astral project now?
No. And according to my grandmother, adults do not do it unless they learn how. And I'm not even sure how a person would learn how to do that. I haven't attempted to do that.
Okay. You had a couple interesting questions for me to ask you, so I might as well ask them. You said, "Is the devil real? Who is Lucifer? And the serpent in the Garden of Eden? And did God create demons?" So, I mean, those were a bunch of them that you had outlined for me. So, all balled up together. What are your thoughts around these?
Well, that's a lot of questions in one. Satan or the devil, those words, they've just been twisted into a title for like an ontological being in Christianity. But in reality, the word Satan is a Hebrew word that simply means adversary or accuser. And the word devil is just a Greek rendering of Satan. So both words just really mean adversary. And according to my loved ones on the other side, and also where I landed after reading and studying the topic for myself prior to ever communicating with my grandmother, evil is relatively real, but there is no singular being that is the enemy of everything good and holy. Satan is not an ontological being. And when we understand the proper meaning of the word Satan, it really brings things into sharper focus. So to answer the question, Satan is not a fallen angel or an ontological being, as is often supposed in mainstream Christianity. But I want to emphasize that I'm also not saying that evil doesn't exist. Ultimately, it's accurate to say that evil is an illusion because it has no basis in truth and will ultimately cease to be. But relatively, we all know experientially that evil wreaks havoc in the physical world that we live in. So yeah, and as for angels and demons, spiritual beings, they do exist according to my loved ones on the other side. Just as there are dualities in this physical realm, like good people, bad people. There's a mixture of favorable and unfavorable here and also there. There is a duality in the astral realm. There are good and bad spirits, malevolent beings, beings of light, a whole range of entities that actually exist. But I've noticed a lot in the deconstructing of religion has led many to do away with the spiritual realm entirely. It's kind of a tendency to sort of just disregard any of that as nonsense and misinterpretation in the church. And so relegating demons and the devil to nothing more than a human ego is often the case. But I think that's just an overcompensation for the unhealthy focus of the supernatural in many Christian circles. And when we begin to see the many ways that mainstream Christianity has misinterpreted things, it's easy to drop into the posture of just throwing it all out. But that's an unhealthy approach. In reality, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but not in the extremes. So when we remove the spiritual realm and the supernatural aspects of reality from our worldview, we're left with materialism, a Newtonian worldview. But as quantum physics reveals, the invisible realm is the foundation of the visible realm. What we don't know supports what we do know. So we have to be careful of dualistically dividing things up and discarding anything that exceeds our limited rational concepts as we deconstruct. I mean, the quest for truth is about becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, embracing paradox and not having cut and dried answers. We can't squeeze truth into a container of our finite minds. And oftentimes people become disenchanted with Christianity and then they press into a more rational approach. They appeal to science in a way that isn't always balanced. I mean, I believe in science myself, but I also believe that science has not figured everything out. There are simply some things that transcend our rationality and the ability of science to explain.
Mm-hmm. Going back to demons, I guess we'll call them for lack of a better term. What's their motive? If there truly is good and evil, what is the motive behind evil?
Yeah, so, well, I would say that, evil, the motive behind evil would be just destruction, just chaos, to keep people from integrating. It's really about strengthening the ego, the systems, that run the world. That's a perfect example of how evil perpetuates itself through human civilization. So, yeah, the primary motive behind all evil or malevolent beings would be to, and it's in the Bible too, kill, steal, and destroy. So that would be it.
Okay. A couple times you've mentioned Carl Jung, and I know next to nothing other than in name. So who is Carl Jung? How has he influenced your life? And I think you said that you're a certified Jungian expert or something like that. Forgive me if I put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
Who is Carl Jung?
Yeah. So Carl Jung is a Swiss psychoanalyst who he is responsible for. His model of the ego is one of the shadow versus the persona. You have the ego split between the persona, which is the mask that we wear into the world, what in spiritual circles is often called the false self, the ego self. And then you have the shadow side of things, the unconscious. It would be the conscious and the unconscious. And in his way of articulating things, he would say that we have to bring what's in the unconscious to light and shed light on that we repress those things into the unconscious, and even there's a collective shadow running at work in the world, running the show. And so it's about being able to integrate what I was saying earlier about the integration, that we don't just push away the undesirable aspects of our personalities, but that we welcome them. I think it was the Buddha who, welcomed Mara, the equivalent of the Christian devil, for tea. And so invited him to come and sit on a cushion and have tea. And, like I said, a compassionate awareness of all of these shadow elements and integration of those into the light.
Okay. So we've answered in part our initial question, you know, what happens to us after we die? But we still have one hanging here, which is, what's the purpose of life? So,
Oh,
without taking hours and hours, as I'm sure you could, what is the purpose of life?
the purpose of life is really to awaken. It's as simple as that, really. Joseph Campbell said that people say they want to know the meaning of life. He said, but I don't think that's true. What people want is to experience the rapture of being alive. And I think this really taps into the heart of the issue. If we stop and think about it, people generally do not wrestle with that question when things are going well for them. It's when we're in the trenches, struggling to navigate grief, that this question arises. And what we want is to enjoy life, to experience fulfillment, to have inner peace. And like the French philosopher Albert Camus said, you will never live if you're looking for the meaning of life. So to answer your question, what is the meaning of life? I would just say that the purpose of life is to awaken. All of life is designed to awaken us. And the Zen saying that there are no obstacles along the path, the obstacles are the path. That comes to mind because that really is that, that sums it up quite well. And this doesn't mean that we don't have a calling, which is more of like a vocation or a role that we may feel drawn into. But our ultimate purpose remains the same regardless of our calling. Our purpose is to see through the illusion of the ego and transcend the dualistic or binary mind, which is the path into peace. And it's only when we learn to be present in each moment without getting carried away by reductive thinking that we can experience that rapture of being alive that Campbell refers to. So the point of it all is to just step off the wheel of karma and wake up. And when we do, we find ourselves experiencing that abundant life, which is life to the full, eternal life.
Awesome. So my final question for you then, why did you write this book? Is this a how-to manual? Is this a memoir of your experiences? What do you hope that readers take away from this?
Yeah, I just wanted to share things that I had learned that I thought might help other people in a way that they might have a sense of peace. I know a lot of people who have deconstructed and they struggle to make sense of ultimate reality, to find answers to existential questions, to find a truth that they can rest in. And so there's so much information and misinformation swirling around. It can be really difficult for people to find their footing and to feel that there's something more. That's another thing. A lot of people are stuck feeling like there's something more, but they're not sure what that more is. And so I just thought that maybe if I shared my experience with people and what I have learned in a way that might help others, that they may find a sense of peace. And the fear-based theology, that's the thing, it keeps people bound up. And so it was my hope that people might find something that is more expansive and life-giving, liberating, something more liberating through what I share. So no, it's not a how-to manual. It's more of a, this is what I've learned, and it might help you too if you're open to hear it. And so I'm coming from that angle. I realize it's not for everyone. Not everyone's open to hear what I'm sharing, which is okay, because everybody is where they are on their own journey. We're all at different points on our journey. So yeah, I just wanted to share from my own perspective.
Awesome. You know what? I came up with one more question. So this is the final question.
Okay.
And I'm sure if you asked every person on earth, there would be 8 billion different answers. But what is God?
God is the ground of all being. God is love. God is all, and all is God. That's
all
it.
Right. Everybody, we had Brandy Anderson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here. Thank you.